Hi, welcome to my YouTube channel. I'd like to show you how to make a linen bread bag. This is the bag I'm going to show you how to make. And it is a simple drawstring cord and it closes up neatly. And then on the inside there are no raw seams. And then on the back have a nice closed seam. And again on the base you have a closed seam. So you will need a piece of linen 60 centimeters wide and 50 centimeters long. So that's your piece of linen. And then you will also need some cord, cotton cord, some particularly light cotton, some matching thread, scissors, a ruler, measuring tape, some chalk, and some needles, some pens, sorry. And this is the little pattern I have. It just says here that you need 60 centimeters wide, 30 centimeters long linen fabric, and then just there are markings as to where you need to put the opening for the cord and where to fold the piece of fabric so that you make the channel for the cord. So just using my template, I transfer the measurements onto the measurements onto the fabric. So that's one opening for the cord, and then this is the line at which you're going to fold the channel. And then I do the same on the other side, and that is drawn straight across the fabric. And then this is where I sew to keep the piece of light cotton in place. And these are the pieces of cotton. And then on both sides I have 1.5 centimeter seam allowance on this side and on the other side of the piece of fabric. So here now I've just transferred all the measurements from my pattern piece onto the fabric, and that's the 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. So then I just need to pin the piece of cotton in place. And then do the same on the other side. So I'm going to sew around this oval here, and the markings are on this side. And I use a small stitch length. So I've sewn up here, and then it's holding the piece of cotton in place. want to feed the small piece of cotton through this opening that I'm making. Just take care not to cut the stitches, and then just feed the cotton through. And then do the same on the other side. The light cotton makes it easier to bring it through the small opening. And here we're really making a small buttonhole, and just stitch around the oval, and then stitch the rectangular place to keep the cotton in place, the light cotton in place. So both openings have been finished, and now I just turn down the top of the top piece of cotton, of linen, and pin it in place again, and then remove the pins, because you just want it as a guide for later on, and continue to make the French seam. So that has been ironed, and I have zigzagged across the top, and that will fold down like that when I'm ready to add the cord. So now just make the French seam. So join the two edges that have the seam allowance marked on and pin them together. So what I'm going to do is cut approximately ½ centimetre from one side of the seam, and then fold the longer piece over and under to make our French seam. So back stitch at the beginning and end of the seam. And now here, this is just I'm cutting half of the seam allowance on one piece of fabric. Then open up the seam, and then fold the longer piece under the piece that you've cut and neatly pin in place. And I always iron at this stage. It just makes it so much easier to sew. Then turn it right side out, because it's easier to sew when you do this. And again, just starting at the top, back stitch and hold the seam in place. I'm using the foot as a guide here again. Normally you would use a matching thread, but just for the purpose of being able to show you what I'm doing, I've used grey in this video as well. So now we've ironed this previously, so it just folds down easily, the channel for the cord, and then just match up the seam that's running down the back of the bag. And then pin all the way around. And now what you need to do is sew close to the edge here, and then just along here as well. So again, I'm using the foot as a guide, and this is a short stitch length. And just take care to trim the threads. Now here, this is quite thick, so I'm using a piece of fabric as just to jump over the thick seam and back stitch, and then again another stitch just to make it look neat all the way around. Now, just as normal, turn it inside out, and stitch along the base at an 8mm seam allowance. So it's an 8mm seam allowance. Then I'm going to turn it right side out and ensure that the corners are pushed out, and flatten the seam, and then sew this up at a 1cm seam allowance so that you're catching all the threads on the inside and you've no raw seams. So this is a 1cm seam allowance. And again, I'm using my foot as a guide, running the foot along the base of the bag. And back stitch again. And take your piece of cord, cotton cord, and cut it in half. And then, using a safety pin, feed the cord through the top of the bag. So choose one side to start on, and then feed the cord around the circumference of the bag. And then knot it, and once it has been washed it will look like this. Quite a nice little tassel. and then you wash the bread bag at 40 degrees and air dry.